Hey, Dr. Campbell.
Hello, Dr. Favro.
How's your day going?
It's going.
Is it?
It's not done yet, but it's going.
Yeah, you got a little afternoon ahead of you.
Yeah.
What? So last time we got an introduction down. It's just water. I just get thirsty.
Yeah. Real talk show.
Yeah, of course it is. High budget talk show. Last time we talked about triangulation.
That's kind of where we ended.
Yeah,
right?
ended on that little teaser for this week. What is triangulation?
So triangulation, I learned about it initially taking a course called The Art of Breath. The Art of Breath is a course that's more principle focused than it is technique focused.
Okay.
So it's kind of...
So like teach a man to fish.
Exactly. And the premise is using the breath to manage stress and to enhance performance. So
Okay.
kind of fits into definitely what we do here from a performance side, but also just regular stressors that we see too. So triangulation was introduced, and the first concept is that there are three components. So we have state, we have mechanics, and we have physiology.
Okay, so break each one of those down. What do you mean state?
So state is more, think of how the nervous system is functioning.
Okay.
Kind of, now that could be the autonomic nervous system, that could also be our central nervous system, but it's kind of how we're doing from like a mental standpoint.
Is that like stress, anxiety, depression, like
Yes.
mental health things too? Okay,
Yep.
all right, cool.
The next component is physiology. So physiology is probably, one of the easiest ways would be thinking of heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate. So our
Sort of
natural
daily function. Okay.
circulation, all these
Sure.
things. And then mechanics is probably the thing that's most familiar to us, and that's the biomechanical world. So connective tissue, joints, muscles, tendons, ligaments, and that's actually all connective tissue, but
Yeah.
So
Okay, so you have those three components that make up
triangulation.
the triangle.
The triangle, yep.
Okay.
And it's this idea that if you only attack one of those things, they all influence one another, right? So
Sure.
the example that we talked about in the first video was, somebody might be coming in with neck pain. We might adjust their cervical spine and their mid-back, and they might notice, wow, it's easier to breathe, right? So there's your physiology. They might feel almost somewhat of like a euphoric sense, like they might feel clear, right? So there's your state, and if they have range of motion, there's their mechanics, right?
Okay.
What they talked about in the course was how you can actually use this if you measure it on a regular basis and track it. You can use triangulation to basically identify how rested and ready you are to take on stress.
And by stress, you mean physical stress, emotional stress?
Every stress,
Okay.
right? Like everything is a stress, right?
Yeah,
good
yeah.
stress, bad stress,
Yeah.
like
Eustress, distress.
yeah. And it's how rested and ready are you to take that on, whether that's a race, whether that's a training event, whether that's a conversation with your boss, right?
Good point.
So the way that you would look at it is you would pick three components that are easy to track and that you could easily like write down and that are accessible. And one example might be mechanically touching your toes, because we know that every functioning human should be able to bend down and touch their toes. That's not necessarily the case, but like everybody should be able to. Like,
Yeah, it's a baseline test.
From a physiology standpoint, I think resting heart rate is an easy physiological measure. So you find your radial pulse, set a timer for 30 seconds, count the beats, multiply it by 2, and there's your resting heart rate. And ideally, that's going to be tracked best in the morning when you first get up.
Okay.
And then you could also look at, from a mental state, it could be how well you slept, how rested do you feel, on a scale of 0 to 10, how irritable are you? How stressed are you on a 0 to 5 scale? Which that one is a little subjective. There are other ways that you could check it. There was one that I thought was interesting, was you can download an app and you can do like a finger touch tap.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it'll count how many times you tap the screen. and that could be used as a baseline.
That's amazing.
Grip strength is one that
Yeah.
I know that, grip strength has actually been shown to be a better predictor for cardiovascular disease than I think blood pressure tests. So you have,
That's fascinating.
and grip kind of ties into like all three of those, right? Like there's mechanical, there's physiological, there's a state. Like,
Yeah.
if you're not feeling with it, like.
Sure.
So the idea is trying to take those, record them, track them over a period of time, and use that information to become more connected with how you're doing so you can best manage your day and everything that comes along with it. Again, whether those are important meetings, whether those are training events, whether that's just general training, whatever it is.
Okay, so it's using it's objectively, and we'll get into there is some subjective piece that it has to be, but it's trying to objectively take all three of those components and be able to predict your ability for that day and what you're best suited to do or should not do.
And it's one of those things, like while at this office we do see some very high level athletes, like college athletes, professional athletes, we also see a lot of weekend warriors, right? I think there's a certain type A personality that goes with those weekend warriors that sometimes they feel like, it's Tuesday and Tuesday is my long run day and I've got to do my long run, right? And then Thursday might be more of an easy cadence run and Saturday, might be intervals, right?
Sure.
I'm just giving an example here. The idea would be that, if you were trending down on how rested and ready you are, maybe it's not a good day. Like there's always, we hope there's always tomorrow, right? So it's managing it. Like maybe on a day where you're going to push it, but your resting heart rate is elevated, which is usually a sign of under recovery. If you have enough data points, like usually I say about a week or so to kind of get a baseline. If that number is trending upwards, and it could be up for a variety of reasons, it might not be the best idea to go out and really like hit it hard, because then your body is potentially in a more susceptible position to suffer an injury, right? Sprain, strain, something simple that could then take you out of the rest of your training.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think that using those objective data points does a couple things, but it forces or encourages the athlete, and we use athlete interchangeably, but it compels them to be more connected with their training program and what might be most beneficial. And going back to that triangulation piece, we tend to use triangles and the tripod concept a lot. I know I use it when I'm teaching core rehabilitation classes to postpartum moms or people who are coming back from an injury, that there's core strength, core stability, and core coordination. And if one of those is lacking, you're more likely to be susceptible to injury, but they don't all mean the same thing. They're just very closely related. So going back to triangulation, athletes will, in part, and we've seen this here, if they are stressed about something, they might use activity to go out and manage that stress. They might say, well, I had a long day at work. I'm going to go do a Peloton exercise for a class, an hour-long class. Or I'm going to go for a run, or I'm going to hit the gym later tonight than I typically would. And that kind of takes that triangle or that tripod and shifts the balance in one direction or shortens one of the legs so that they're more susceptible to injury. And it may just keep perpetuating the cycle.
And I think that it's identifying that risk, because there are those people that they use exercise or fitness as a way to manage stress.
Sure.
Which could be an issue, right? Because like from the same side, like you could use another substance that might not be beneficial to your body to manage stress, that might not be healthy. Exercise is one of those ones that...
Yeah, some people, it's hard to say, but some people use alcohol, or some people eat.
That's what I was alluding, yeah.
Some people do different things. I have a fascinating one. I was actually talking to my brother about this. So my brother's a firefighter and an EMT, and he was saying how he struggles with recovery because of sleep. He has a hard time when he sleeps and the quality of sleep. And that's what we talked about earlier when you're like, oh, you can document how well you sleep.
Yeah.
So I know you have a thought on people saying, how well do you sleep? How do you sleep?
Well, so you can't see it, but I do have a data tracker here. So I use a Whoop band.
And we'll link to Whoop and a couple other things that we're talking about, some books and stuff in the notes.
And this is just one that I found. There's Fitbit, there is Garmin. There's an Oura Ring. There's all different ways that you can track and measure these things. This is just the one that I think is, Apple Watch is another one, Samsung Galaxy Watch. I was listening to a podcast with Kelly Starrett and Gray Cook, and Kelly Starrett is somebody, he's definitely an influencer in the field. I know we have his book. I think it's actually up in here. It's Supple Leopard.
Supple Leopard.
Yeah. And this one, they were talking about this component of rest and recovery, and they talked about sleep, and Kelly Starrett said to Greg Cook, he goes, I don't trust patients anymore. And he said, because I guess, and again, I'm paraphrasing, but in my head, I'm thinking like, oh yeah, you get burnt a little bit, right? And because I know I've had those conversations, and it's how, hey, are you sleeping? Yeah, I sleep well. Okay, like subjectively, like, yeah, you might be in bed at 8 o'clock and you might wake up at 6 o'clock. But do you actually know the quality of your sleep? Are you waking up in the night? Like, again, the beauty of something like Whoop is, I don't have my phone on me, but I can tell you that last night I had a great night because I checked it when I woke up. I had almost 7.5 hours of quality sleep. Yeah. I had almost 2 hours of REM sleep, 2 hours of deep wave sleep. And that's not the norm. I'm not perfect. This is just like all the stars aligned.
We'll put a screenshot up in the video. We'll overlay a screenshot so people can see what the data points look like.
But that's the way that I know if I'm actually sleeping well. And I think the only way to truly recover is to sleep, right? Like recovery on a chiropractic table and Normatec boots isn't really recovery, it's actually stress.
You're pushing that eustress to get rid of the distress part of it.
But the only way you actually manage it is through sleeping.
Yeah.
And if you're not sleeping, you're not recovering. And if you're not measuring, you actually, you don't really know where you are.
And I think a lot of people confuse their quality of sleep with the quantity of sleep because there's no subjective way besides feeling rested in the morning.
Yeah.
But that can be a component of
there are other things
physical or physiological, and I think that's it can be a bit of a confusing thing for people who are not in the field to understand and be able to accurately answer the question: how well do you sleep, or how do you sleep, not how long do you sleep? And we're a big fan of the book by Matthew Walker, and he talks about in part of it how REM sleep and non-REM sleep and the different aspects of sleep and how we're weighted toward non-REM sleep at the beginning, which is more physical recovery. Non-REM, NREM sleep, and then REM sleep later in the night, which is more of that emotional, psychological stuff. And I'm still reading through the book right now, but I just finished a chapter where he writes about the concept that people who cut their morning short, get up early, that's when you typically restore your emotional component of that sleep. That's the REM sleep. And you wake up, you'll be more irritated, things like that. We put that into the triangulation puzzle or matrix. If you're emotionally stressed or not able to handle some of those stresses, what does that do to your physical aspect? Then what does it do to your physiological aspect? Yeah. And I think that there's a lot to it. And going back to my brother being a firefighter, he says to me all the time, when I'm in the firehouse, I don't sleep more than 2 hours because I'm constantly just on alert and ready to go. And he goes, it takes me a day of sleep in my own bed to be able to recover and feel good. He's like, I can rarely get a workout in that I think is a quality workout after a shift.
Yeah, and I would direct him to Andrew Huberman's podcast where he has a whole episode that's geared towards night shift, and because that's your circadian rhythm, that's your hormones, like that's probably way more than what we'll get into today, but it is something where you also look at most of us have a natural circadian rhythm. Some of us are either night owls, some of us are morning people, some of us are in between. That also tends to shift as we get older, and that's where you'll see like teenagers. Teenagers, generally, it's not them being disobedient, it's just their natural circadian rhythm. They tend to function better at night, and then they like to sleep more during the day, right? And I remember I went through that phase, and as we get older, it tends to shift. And I can speak, me personally, I'm probably more, if I had an ideal time to get up, it would probably be around like 8:30 or 9 o'clock. And if I could go to bed at like the time that I felt most tired, it would be about 11:30 or 12 o'clock at night. And so, but we have patients that like to come in the morning, and even if I get myself into bed at 9 o'clock for a 7:30 patient or 7:15, whatever it is, I still don't really sleep well. And I can actually see that. If I were to pull up my data, you'll actually see most, I guess it's like a Wednesday, because it's looking at the night before. Well, no, Tuesday and Thursdays, you look at it, and my percentage usually drops like 10 or 15%, just because I have trouble like unwinding and getting there. Is
that more of...
It's a me problem.
Genetic? Is that more genetic than... anything? Because I'm the opposite. Like, I want to go to bed at 9 o'clock and wake up at 5:30.
I don't know. Yeah, I think it might be genetic DNA. Like, I think we're just predisposed to that circadian rhythm, and it's our hormones. And you can try and tinker with that. I can expose myself to light early in the day. I can expose myself to sunsets later in the day. But then I start to think about patients, and sometimes patients, they'll often say they're not sleeping well, and we know that that's going to impact how well they're responding to our treatment plan. But if they have 3 kids and they have to wake up at 5 in the morning and they work late, like, sometimes that's just life, and you understand. But I think it's making that, it's creating an awareness towards that, and it's working towards that common goal. But you can't sleep on the fact that sleep will influence how you respond, not only in a performance setting, but also like if you're dealing with an injury.
Yeah, and I think the concept of sleep is fantastic, and the concept, you talked a little bit about it, but the concept of breathing is fantastic. There's some really basic physiological things that we do that we take for granted. A lot of people take for granted.
Well, I'll leave you with this thought. Dr. Spina, Andrea Spina, who is the functional range or functional anatomy seminars is like his system, but I did the FRC training, and he made this really interesting point that I think you can break it down, and he mentions that you can look at in any setting. It doesn't matter whether it's physical medicine, chiropractic, whatever it is. Like, that's kind of where we live. Even nutrition, and you can look at the body and you can say, what did humans evolve to do, and what are we currently doing? And therein lies the problem, right? Like, we weren't really designed to have a camera on recording us, be sitting here like in a nice comfortable space. Like, this has been the last several hundred years we've had more comfort, but for thousands of years, right, we were really primitive.
Yeah.
And that's the way our DNA is built, and that's the way our bodies were built. And a lot of this comes into tapping into these primal things like breathing and sleep and light exposure and eating food that's local to an area that's grown at a certain time of year.
Yeah, we just in many ways we have too much access. And not that it's a bad thing, not that I think it's horrible.
No,
we have too much.
I don't live
internet.
in a cave.
We
I have an apartment with a comfortable bed.
Yeah, of course. So let's loop back the triangulation theory to what are things that people can do, knowing that concept of physical state, mental state, and physiology. What can they do at home to just start to make an impact? Like, what's step 1?
I think step 1 would be establishing a baseline. So if you have some sort of fancy data tracker, if you're wearing something on your wrist, look at the settings and see what it measures.
Okay.
I would start with looking at sleep and resting heart rate. I think those are like pretty like easy ones.
Yeah.
I would pick one movement that you do on a regular basis, and that might be a sit to stand, that might be a squat, a deep squat, that might be bending over and touching your toes, and I would try and link those three on a daily basis. You could chart it either in a notebook or on an Excel, and let's use the example of resting heart rate, toe touch, and sleep, right? And sleep, you could, if you don't have something measuring your quality of sleep, you could just do like in bed at what time and out of bed at this time, right?
Yeah, and even take like a subjective like plus or minus.
Yeah.
Like, felt good or felt bad.
And I would use sleep as state and maybe just rate it as 0 is terrible and 5 is
Great. Best sleep ever.
best sleep ever, right?
They're excited about it out there.
They are. They heard about the video, the vlog. So I would look at sleep and quality for state. I would look at resting heart rate for physiology, and I would look at a toe touch pattern for just like overall mobility, motor control. And I would just basically rank them. Like, can I wake up in the morning and touch my toes? Yes. Can I wake up, or what's my resting heart rate? What was my time in bed, time out of bed, and how would you rate the sleep? I would track that for a week and just kind of create a baseline.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, the magic lies in the more data that you can accumulate and the patterns that you can start to see in the trends where, if you don't want to do this, like get a fancy thing like Whoop and
it's on your phone.
And it'll do it for you, right? Like you don't have to think about it. But the goal is to try and connect more with yourself, right? So like on days where like you feel on top of the world, you want to look at those numbers and see if they're reflecting a positive experience with your day-to-day activities. You also have to take into account that there are other things that influence these, like alcohol, tobacco use, stress, like work, like training, all these other things can sometimes make this hard to read. And that's like, again, these products, that's what they take into account for an algorithm. So they measure your daily stress, and that gets calculated into these formulas, which you might not be able to do from a notebook. But I think it all comes back to, can you see the patterns of what your body is trying to tell you and how you're feeling?
Yeah, and to which I think is great. So basically, just start to track it. Just start to track some of those things so you can be more in tune with what you're doing as a person.
Yeah.
And we use this in the office, and patients don't necessarily
they don't know it,
which is kind of makes us unique in that sense. But we will look at a physical component. We'll do a sit to stand test, a lunge test. We'll ask people how their pain is. We'll talk to them about sleep. We'll talk to them about work. But then we strive to do a good job in asking people, how was your weekend? I heard your mom, last time you said that you were stressed because your mom is sick. How is she doing? Oh, she's still really sick. Mm-hmm. I'll never forget I had a patient who came in and was dealing with a really, really challenging family problem. And they had neck pain. And once the family problem resolved, actually, they came in on a Monday and said, I feel great. It's the first time this patient's come in and said that they felt great. And I said, well, what happened over the weekend? And she said, the family issue that I was dealing with got resolved on Friday. And felt great from it. And you've seen that too, where people come in and something that is outside of our control as a provider, outside the patient's control, maybe some kind of an environmental stress or an emotional stress, kind of takes over with that person. So, to kind of wrap all this up and close it up, because we could talk about this for a long time.
You know what? I want to share something else that kind of goes into that really quickly is, again, this idea that sometimes we're a little bit disconnected. And again, I admit I was one of those people. I didn't know how crappy I was running until I got to objectively see it. And then I put into place these changes and routines and trying to just feel better overall. But I had a patient that I only saw once, And I said, how'd you do after your first visit? Were you sore? Like, and they said, nah, I didn't really notice much of a difference. And I said, all right, like, no big deal. And then as we're going through the visit, they said, I forgot to tell you that my coach was watching a movement that I was doing and said that it looked much better. And he goes, this person, they said, and then I thought about it and I said, yeah, it does feel a little bit better. And this is that idea that sometimes, again, like we're sneaking these little like mechanical aspects into a treatment program. We're hoping that people get the benefit, and sometimes they are getting the benefit, and we don't know because they don't feel it. So we have to tease these things out of them.
It's the infamous case of, hey, how are you feeling after the last visit? No change whatsoever. Okay, great. Well, we're going to continue and try a couple different things. How was your weekend? Oh, it was great. I mowed my lawn and sealed my driveway over the weekend. Oh, how did that feel? Great. I had no pain at all. And it's just not being aware for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
That's why. But those are the things that we really try to focus on to get some objective findings.
And maybe this is next week's episode, but in rock tape they talk about sometimes we have pain or mechanical issues because we have poor sensation of an area.
Yeah, that's a great one. We're definitely going to talk about, we love Rock Tape's philosophy on sensation and mechanoreceptors and what that actually does.
But that almost ties right into triangulation with this whole idea of like,
of course,
you're just connecting, you're just becoming more aware of your surrounding, and things that we do like an adjustment or scraping or cupping or taping, what they do is they give you more feedback to your environment.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, so wrap things up. Triangulation, start to document some of the things that you're doing.
Yeah, or look at the thing that's on your wrist collecting the data.
Yeah, or just look at it if you have one. We'll put a link to Whoop and a couple of other programs and the things that we like, and Matthew Walker's book. There's a couple of neat resources that we've referenced here that we'll kind of reach out to. So if you have questions, please let us know. Leave them in the comments. Shoot us an email. Head to our website. You can contact us directly through there. And we hope you enjoyed this episode of Health History Humans, and stay tuned for the next one.
Yeah, we'll be back.
Cool.